Have you ever noticed how much of your life revolves around trying to keep everything in order? We measure, plan, calculate, and control down to the smallest detail. We create endless lists, schedules, and strategies. We track our sleep, calories, steps, and productivity. We endlessly scroll through social media not just to pass the time, but to compare to see if we're still aligned with some invisible standard. The modern world has convinced us that control is not only possible, it's indispensable. But what if this obsession is precisely what makes life slip through our fingers? The paradox is clear. The more we try to control, the less alive we feel. In ancient myths, control was never promised. The gods were unpredictable, storms came without warning, fate could change in a breath. Humans lived with uncertainty as their companion. Today, however, we create apps to predict moods, the market, even love. We seek to master what was never meant to be mastered, the complexity of life itself. Our culture has turned control into a kind of cult. Success is measured by how many aspects of life seem under control. A stable career, a perfectly shaped body, a predictable routine. We celebrate discipline as if it were salvation and treat spontaneity as immaturity. We punish ourselves when plans fail, when emotions overflow, when reality insists on resisting our control. But the truth is that control is almost always just an illusion. The market crashes. Relationships end. Illness interrupts. The phone rings and suddenly everything changes. The world doesn't bow to our lists and calendars. And yet, we persist. Why? Because control calms the fear of chaos. Carl Jung understood this profoundly. He saw that much of what we do in life is nothing more than a defense mechanism against the unconscious, that vast, unpredictable ocean within us. The ego craves order, predictability, mastery. But beneath the surface lie instincts, desires, traumas, archetypes, and shadows that cannot be silenced by willpower. And so, control becomes a mask. It allows us to believe we're safe, when in reality, we're just numbing the awareness of our fragility. Think about the language we use. Take control of your life. Control your emotions. Control your destiny. These phrases echo in motivational speeches, self-help books, and corporate slogans. But beneath their inspirational tone, they carry a dangerous promise. That life can be conquered like a machine, that chaos can be tamed. But chaos is not the enemy. Chaos is life itself. Have you ever wondered why, even after organizing every detail, you still feel restless? Why, even when everything seems to work out, satisfaction doesn't last? It's because our deepest self, the one Jung pointed out to us, doesn't flourish under the rigid grip of control. It flourishes in authenticity, in surrender, in the moments when we allow the current to carry us, instead of forcing the river to follow our map. Control pretends to protect us from pain, but it often prevents us from experiencing joy. It keeps us so busy managing outcomes that we forget to live the process. It locks us in a cage where every variable must be calculated, but the air inside becomes suffocating. The irony is that life flows precisely when we loosen our grip. Think about the act of sleeping. The more you tree, the more you sleep, the more awake you become. Only when you stop forcing, when you let go, does sleep come. Control fails exactly where surrender is needed. Likewise, meaning, creativity, and love arise when we allow them, not when we demand them. Jung called this movement individuation, the unfolding of the self through dialogue with the unconscious, not through attempts to dominate it. And yet we resist, because letting go feels like death. The ego trembles at the thought of losing control. We fear that, without control, everything will fall apart. But perhaps it is precisely in falling apart that life finally begins to come together. This is the paradox we will explore together. Ignoring control doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding the part of you that was never lost. So I ask you again. What if everything you hold on to is the very thing that's stopping you from truly living? We live in an age that has transformed control into a modern myth, almost a silent dogma. From an early age, we learned that life needs to be planned like an architectural blueprint. Studying, choosing the right career, accumulating achievements, building a solid reputation, maintaining impeccable health, ensuring financial stability, and, ideally, displaying it all proudly on social media. It's as if every step of our lives must fit within an invisible manual of productivity and self-control. The logic is simple: those who control win. Those who don't lose. This narrative, however, is more fragile than it appears, because it ignores the most basic element of life: uncertainty. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman described modernity as liquid, made of instability and insecurity. Nothing remains solid for long. Jobs disappear, relationships fall apart, truths become obsolete. And faced with this liquidity, our reaction has been to try to solidify life by force, creating rigid routines, infallible methods, long-term plans. But, like trying to hold water between our fingers, the tighter we squeeze, the more it leaks. This myth of control is fueled by performance culture. We live surrounded by discipline gurus, self-help books that promise 10 steps to control your destiny, courses that teach you how to master your mind. At every turn, someone sells the promise that it's possible to shield yourself from chaos. But chaos doesn't negotiate. It arrives. It shatters plans. It laughs at our certainties. This obsession with control is not just cultural but existential. Camus, revisiting the myth of Sisyphus, showed how human life resembles the futile effort of pushing a boulder up a mountain, only to see it roll back down. Control in this sense is our boulder. We push it every day believing that this time it will stay up. But it always falls back down, reminding us that fate does not obey our command. The paradox is cruel. We seek control to feel safe, but it is precisely this search that generates anxiety. We try to predict the future to escape fear, but the more we look to it, the more insecure we become. The myth of control feeds the very anguish it promises to cure. On social media, this myth takes on its most seductive form. There, everyone can create a controlled version of themselves. Adjusted photos, carefully edited narratives, timelines organized like shop windows. It's a spectacle of self-control. But behind this polished appearance, emptiness grows. Because living isn't about posing. Living isn't about editing. Living is about losing track, stumbling, improvising. It's about letting the unexpected happen. And yet, by believing in the myth, we come to fear the very thing that would make us feel alive: vulnerability. We become hostages to an impossible promise, that it is possible to master what is by nature untamable. Think about how we talk about time, wasting time, gaining time, controlling time. But time cannot be controlled. It escapes all forms of calculation. It passes while you try to hold it, indifferent to your spreadsheets and calendars. This is perhaps the greatest reminder that the myth of control is just that, a myth. And yet we persist. Because admitting our lack of control confronts us with an uncomfortable truth: we are fragile. Perhaps this is why Jung said that the unconscious takes revenge when we try to control it too much. Control is not only a cultural illusion, but also a psychological illusion. The more we deny the shadow, the more it infiltrates our actions, our lapses, our failures. The more we try to shield ourselves from chaos, the more it finds loopholes to remind us of its presence. The modern myth of control, therefore, is not just a survival strategy. It is also an invisible prison. It promises us freedom, but makes us slaves to discipline, performance, and unattainable perfection. It offers us a sense of security, but sows the constant anxiety of losing control. It gives us the illusion of power, but robs us of the lightness of simply existing. And here arises the question we rarely dare to ask: is controlling life really living? Or is it precisely the attempt to control that prevents us from experiencing life to its fullest? If the myth of control already binds us culturally on a collective level, Carl Jung shows us that the illusion runs even deeper. It dwells within us, in the relationship we have with our own psyche. For Jung, conscious life is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of who we are is submerged in the unconscious, a vast, pulsating territory full of forces that cannot be tamed. The ego, this small island of consciousness, desperately tries to maintain its absolute sovereignty. It organizes, plans, decides, and believes itself to be in control. But in reality, the unconscious acts constantly, like underwater currents that drag the boat while the captain gazes at the horizon, believing he is steering the helm. This is where control proves to be a dangerous illusion. When we try to repress everything that doesn't fit the ideal of order, fears, impulses, weaknesses, pain, we are, without realizing it, feeding the shadow. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the set of aspects of our psyche that we reject, deny, or hide. It holds what we don't accept in ourselves: anger, envy, vulnerability, unspeakable desires. But it also holds forgotten potential, suppressed talents, strengths we don't dare express. When we insist on rigidly controlling ourselves, we push these contents deeper and deeper. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It infiltrates our dreams, our lapses, our compulsions, our repeated mistakes. It projects itself onto the people around us, making us hate in them the very things we deny in ourselves. It rules us from under the table while we believe we're in charge. It's like trying to control a volcano with a metal lid. For a while it seems to work. But the pressure builds and builds until an eruption becomes inevitable. The price of excessive control is unexpected explosions. Emotional crises, mental breakdowns, impulsive choices we don't understand. How many times have you asked yourself, why did I do that if I didn't want to? This question is the signature of the shadow at work, a reminder that consciousness is not the absolute master of psychic life. For Jung, the true path is not to control the shadow but to dialogue with it. To acknowledge it, give it space, and understand that it is also a part of us. The process of individuation, the maturation of the psyche, happens precisely when we stop fighting the unconscious and begin to integrate its voices into the fabric of consciousness. But this requires courage. Because letting go of control is opening the door to what scares us. It's allowing the uncertain, the irrational, the instinctive to surface. Jung said that enlightenment doesn't come from imagining figures of light, but rather from those who can make darkness conscious. And that's anything but comfortable. We live in an age that values masks, the mask of success, confidence, and impeccable productivity. Showing vulnerability feels like weakness. Admitting contradictions feels like failure. That's why the myth of control is so seductive. It protects us from the shame of revealing the truth. But by hiding the truth, we also lose the chance to become whole. Perhaps this is why so many people silently feel exhausted. Exhausted not by life itself, but by the constant effort of keeping the mask in place. Exhausted by feigning balance, by monitoring thoughts, by correcting emotions like someone correcting a text full of errors. This profound fatigue is not just psychological, it is existential. It is the exhaustion of fighting against oneself. And yet, Jung offers us a way out, to let go of the helm. Not to abandon ourselves to chaos, but to recognize that part of life has never been under our control. That the unconscious is not an enemy to be controlled, but a dimension to be listened to. When we stop stifling the shadow, it stops acting as a saboteur and begins to act as a guide. Here's the paradox. The more we try to control our psyche, the more we become controlled by what we deny. But when we dare to make space for what's hidden, when we embrace inner uncertainty, life begins to align in a more authentic way. And perhaps this is Jung's invitation, to let the unconscious speak, not to take our place, but to show us that totality is not born from domination, but from integration. If Jung already warned us about the danger of trying to control our own psyche, the modern world seems to have taken this impulse to an almost unbearable level. We live in the age of performance, where everything needs to be measured, evaluated, and displayed. Life has ceased to be lived and has become a constant spectacle of metrics. Likes, followers, productivity, results. Control here is not just desired, it's demanded. Social media has become the grand stage for this theater of control. There, everyone presents a carefully edited version of themselves. Filtered photos, rehearsed phrases, narratives constructed to appear coherent and successful. Spontaneity is stifled because the unexpected doesn't generate engagement. What matters is not living the experience, but recording it in a controlled way for others to consume. However, behind this polished display hides a profound weariness. Because life doesn't fit into perfect frames. Life is irregular, contradictory, full of flaws. And when we try to force it into the mold of performance, we pay a high price. Chronic anxiety, incessant comparisons, the feeling that we're never enough. This cult of control also takes the form of toxic discipline. Wake up at 5 in the morning. Master your mind. Be ruthless with your habits. On every corner, there are manuals promising the perfect life if only we can control every aspect of our routine. But deep down, these formulas don't free us. They imprison us even more. They transform existence into a race with no finish line, where rest becomes guilt and pleasure becomes suspect. The result? A void disguised as efficiency. People seemingly successful but secretly exhausted. Faces smiling in photos, but carrying a loneliness that doesn't show in their stories. Disciplined bodies but minds in tatters. It's as if we're living in a gigantic collective performance, where everyone pretends to be in control, but behind the scenes, no one really knows where they're going. Jung would say that this mismatch between the social mask and our inner truth is the perfect recipe for neurosis, because the more we try to maintain our persona, this idealized character we present to the world, the more the shadow grows underground. And sooner or later the shadow takes its toll. It manifests itself in panic attacks, emotional breakdowns, silent addictions, and an existential despondency that no external achievement can erase. The tyranny of performance is, at its core, a collective form of repression. We repress vulnerability, doubt, fragility, the very things that make us human. We pretend we're machines programmed to perform, but we forget that even machines break down. And when we do, we feel guilty for failing to maintain the pretense of control. This logic isn't limited to social media or work. It also invades our relationships. We want to control how others see us, how they desire us, how they love us. We create rigid expectations, plan entire conversations in our heads, and rehearse reactions. But being in a relationship is, by definition, about immersing ourselves in the unpredictable. The more we try to control, the further we move away from genuine intimacy. The same is true of contemporary spirituality. Instead of opening ourselves to the mystery, we often seek techniques and rituals as tools of mastery. Meditating to control the mind, praying to control destiny, practicing to attract only what we desire. Even the sacred, in this context, is reduced to a tool of performance. The tyranny of control then not only exhausts us, it dehumanizes us. Because being human isn't about controlling every detail, but about learning to live with uncertainty, with failure, with surprise. Being human is about accepting that life overflows any system we try to impose. And herein lies the cruelest paradox of the modern world. In seeking absolute mastery over life, we lose precisely that which could make it meaningful, the ability to flow, to let ourselves be swept along by the unexpected, to discover meaning not in control but in surrender. Ultimately, the tyranny of performance presents us with a silent choice: to continue nurturing the illusion that life can be tamed like a machine, or to dare to let go of the reins and accept that perhaps true strength lies in allowing the unpredictable to transform us. Because after all, what is more human, the artificial perfection of a flawless script, or the authenticity of a story that is written in fits and starts? If everything so far has revealed the illusion of control and the devastating effects of its tyranny, the next step is perhaps the most challenging: learning to flow. And here it's important to clarify, flowing isn't giving up, it's not living with our arms crossed, waiting for life to happen to us. Flowing is something else. It's a stance toward existence. It's the courage to release our clenched fist and realize that the river already knows the way, even when we don't. Carl Jung showed us that individuation, this process of becoming whole, does not happen through rigidity but through integration. It's not about overcoming the unconscious with willpower, but about dialoguing with it, allowing it to reveal to us what consciousness alone cannot see. Flow, therefore, is accepting that there is something within us, and outside of us, that needs space to act without our command. This wisdom is not new. The ancient Taoists called it Wu Wei, non-forcing, acting in harmony with the natural flow of life. For them, the more we try to manipulate reality, the further we move away from it. But when we cease obsessive striving, when we stop swimming against the current, we discover that the river takes us exactly where we need to go. This idea is echoed in Jung's own psychology. He spoke of synchronicity, those moments when seemingly unconnected events align as if responding to a deeper meaning. Synchronicity isn't something we can force. It happens when we leave space, when we're not obsessed with controlling every detail. It's almost as if the universe can only whisper when we finally stop shouting. But flowing requires a frightening detachment. Our culture has trained us to believe that without control, we will lose everything: our direction, our dignity, our identity. The truth, however, is that it is precisely excessive control that makes us lose touch with who we are. Flowing, in this sense, is returning to a forgotten simplicity. Breathing without trying to measure it, loving without trying to predict the end, creating without expecting applause, living without needing to justify each step. Of course, this doesn't mean living without discipline or responsibility. The paradox lies precisely in recognizing that there is a discipline deeper than that imposed by the clock and goals. The discipline of listening. Listening to yourself, to your body, to your unconscious, to life. Listening without imposing immediate answers. Listening without the desire to manipulate. This discipline is rarer and more transformative. When we let go of control, something unexpected happens. Life takes on a rhythm of its own, and often that rhythm is wiser than the plans we had made. Situations that seemed impossible begin to resolve themselves, not because we forced them, but because we left space for something new to emerge. Relationships deepen when we stop trying to mold the other person. The body finds balance when we stop punishing it. The mind calms when we accept that we don't need to conquer every thought. And yet we resist. Because surrendering to the flow also means accepting uncertainty. It's walking without guarantees, without a definitive map. It's trusting that there's a meaning that perhaps only reveals itself along the way and not before. But isn't that precisely what makes life bearable? The possibility of surprise, of discoveries, of unexpected encounters? What would existence be like if every detail were controlled in advance? Perhaps this is why so many who have learned to flow describe a feeling of lightness, of inner space, as if an old weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Not because life became easier, but because they stopped fighting the inevitable. It's the relief of understanding that not everything depends on us, and that this isn't a weakness but a freedom. To flow is to accept the death of an illusion, the illusion that we are absolute masters of our destiny. And in accepting this death, a new possibility arises, that of being more whole, more present, more human. So I return to the question that has been running through this entire path. What if everything you try to control is precisely what prevents you from living? The answer perhaps lies not in more effort but in less. Not in more control but in more surrender. The paradox is simple and brutal. Only when we let go of control does life finally begin to happen. If this reflection made you pause for a moment, perhaps it's because a part of you needed to hear it. Deep down, we all carry this paradox, the desire to control and the need to let go. If you're looking for more conversations like this, that touch on the most intimate contradictions of the human condition, subscribe to The Human Paradox. We are just beginning to unravel what it truly means to be human.